My name is Kathy Brinkman, and I will be presenting on the legislative history of the 1969 National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA. NEPA was enacted with a dual purpose. First, to establish a national environmental policy. Under NEPA, agencies must evaluate potential environmental impacts before implementing a major federal action. They must disclose proposed actions and demonstrate that they have considered significant environmental impacts. Through the NEPA process, they must allow for public participation. The second purpose of this act was to create a Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ. NEPA is one of the most significant laws for federal land managers. CEQ regulations have 3 tiers of agency review for federal actions: categorical exclusion, environmental impact statement, and environmental assessment. Agencies determine which of these 3 processes are necessary based on their proposed action. Broad NEPA reviews of new plans or programs occur in addition to site-specific reviews prior to project implementation. NEPA review relies on subject matter experts to analyze impacts to a wide range of topics. NEPA also enables agencies to complete compliance for other applicable environmental laws. Throughout the process, collaboration is necessary between agencies and professional disciplines. To ensure citizens are able to participate in the decision-making process, agencies engage through public meetings, comment periods, and scoping. The CEQ was established under Title II of NEPA and was placed in the Executive Office of the President. CEQ's main responsibilities are to advise the President on environmental policy, monitor long-term environmental trends and conditions, and develop regulations and coordinate NEPA implementation. Prior to 1997, the CEQ also submitted annual environmental quality reports to Congress. NEPA originally did not give CEQ the authority to issue regulations or guidance over implementation of NEPA. This was changed shortly after the law was passed through an executive order by President Nixon in 1970. CEQ often acts as a mediator between federal agencies whose missions conflict, and the chair of the CEQ is a presidentially appointed position. To understand how NEPA came to fruition, we look at the decade leading up to the creation of a national environmental policy. Several environmental disasters in the 1960s spurred a wave of environmentalism, notably Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, the 1966 New York City smog event that killed 168 people, and 2 major events in 1969, an unprecedented oil spill near Santa Barbara, California, and the Cuyahoga River catching on fire, not for the first time, but this time gaining national attention. The environmental activism of the 1960s saw legislative results. Several laws were passed before NEPA, including the Clean Air Act, Water Quality Act, and Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. However, there still remained a need for one comprehensive environmental policy. Senate Bill 1075 was introduced in February 1969 by Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, the chair of the Interior and Insular Affairs Committee. He had been drafting a national environmental policy with his staff since 1967. He worked closely with Bill Van Ness, who was counsel to his committee. The original bill directed the Secretary of the Interior to conduct ecological research and create the CEQ. It did not contain an action-forcing mechanism, such as an environmental impact statement. Senate Bill 1075 was preceded by a decade of similar legislation that had failed to be passed. In 1959, Senator Murray introduced the Resources and Conservation Act, which is the bill NEPA was eventually modeled after. Similarities included establishment of a national environmental policy, creation of Executive Environmental Advisory Council, and a requirement of annual environmental reports. Senate Bill 2282, introduced by Senator Nelson, influenced the original NEPA bill, seeking to give the Secretary of the Interior authority to conduct ecological research and establish monitoring programs. In 1967, Senator Jackson and Senator Kuchel had introduced Senate Bill 2805, which was virtually identical to 1075. Backing up, on July 17, 1968, Congress held a joint House-Senate colloquium to discuss a national policy for the environment. Dr. Linton Caldwell and Bill Van Ness wrote a special report for this session. This colloquium generated new concepts such as the need for action-forcing mechanism with environmental checkpoints, along with the inclusion of citizens in the environmental decision-making process. A Senate committee hearing was held in April of 1969. Dr. Caldwell testified, advocating that agencies should submit environmental evaluations along with their proposals. Joseph Hickles said the CEQ was unnecessary because in May of that year, President Nixon had established an Environmental Quality Council, EQC. Norm Brahman opposed NEPA on behalf of the Department of Transportation. Following the hearing, Senator Jackson introduced an amended bill that added a definitive declaration of national environmental policy, added language about our fundamental right to a healthy environment and responsibility to preserve it. He also added Section 102, a requirement to document findings of environmental impacts. On July 10, 1969, the Senate unanimously voted to pass the bill. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives held hearings in May and June of 1969. Dr. Lee DuBridge testified that the CEQ would have a different function than the EQC. Similarly, Dr. David Gates detailed the complexities of human influence on the environment and supported a council to monitor long-term trends. On July 1, 1969, House Bill 12549 was introduced by Representative John Dingell from Michigan. This House bill was co-authored by numerous other representatives. The House voted 372 to 15 to pass this bill on September 23, 1969. Senator Muskie from Maine was concerned that agencies would too easily be able to mask environmental harm through their reporting. After a series of conversations, the two pro-environment senators were able to reach an agreement. A detailed report would be submitted with alternatives to the proposed action. This was the action-forming mechanism that was the foundation of the EIS. Additionally, agencies would consult and obtain comments from other agencies. This compromise bill went to a conference committee to reconcile differences between the Senate and House bills. By late December 1969, the conference report was approved by both the Senate and House. Finally, on New Year's Day of 1970, a national environmental policy was signed into law by President Nixon.